Nobody remembered when the humans started. Working on Deck 9, he was just there. One day pushing a gray cart loaded with mop heads and chemical sprays, moving through corridors like a shadow that nobody bothered to notice. His name tag read Daniel Harrow, maintenance, sanitation crew grade lowest, cradle. Point was one of the largest Allied stations in the outer territories, a joint hub built and operated by the 5 species of the interstellar compact. The Relave ran the place. They were tall, four-armed insectoids with hard amber shells and compound eyes that never seemed to blink. They held the command seats, the logistics offices, and every corridor checkpoint. Below them came the Poleki, small gray amphibians with 6 eyes and soft voices who handled diplomacy. Then the Garathi, the Shin. And finally, at the very bottom of the ladder, the humans. Humanity had joined the compact only 11 years ago. Youngest species, the least trusted, the most ignored. Daniel did not mind being ignored. In fact, he preferred it that. He mopped the corridor outside the main logistics office at exactly the same time every station morning. He emptied waste receptacles in the officer lounge. At midday, he scrubbed the lavatory stalls on the command level every evening cycle. His schedule never changed. His face never showed anything other than the dull, tired patience of a man doing work nobody respected. Relave officers walked past him without acknowledgement. Some were worse. A logistics clerk named Overseer Drin, broad-shouldered Relave with a cracked left mandible, had a habit of kicking Daniel's mop bucket as he passed, sending dirty water across the floor. Daniel had just cleaned. Drin never looked down when he did it. He never apologized. He simply walked on, his forearms clasped behind his back, talking to his staff about cargo schedules and supply routes as if the human on his knees wiping the floor did not exist. Daniel cleaned it up every single time without a word. Other species joined the game. A Poleki diplomat named Envoy Risik filed a formal complaint about a human being allowed to work near sensitive offices. A Garathi security guard once shoved Daniel into a wall because he was mopping too slowly in a corridor the guard wanted to walk through. 2 young Relave lieutenants made a joke one evening about how humans were only good for cleaning waste, and they laughed so hard their mandibles clicked like stones rattling in a jar. Daniel heard all of it. He heard more than they thought. Every room he entered, he noticed things, the arrangement of data pads on a desk, the faint chemical smell leaking from a cargo crate that was supposed to hold medical supplies but smelled like reactor coolant, the way Overseer Drin changed his shift rotation every few weeks without filing updated reports in the station system. Daniel noticed that Storage Bay 14 on Deck 12 received deliveries at odd hours, always during sensor maintenance windows when internal cameras cycled to low resolution. He noticed that Drin's personal guard, a massive scarred Relave named Hask, escorted those deliveries himself rather than assigning junior staff. He noticed that the cargo manifest listed humanitarian aid bound for a border colony called Varith Minor, but the crates were always heavier than medical supplies should be. He noticed everything, and he said nothing. Till the end of every shift, Daniel returned to his quarters, a closet-sized room deep in a human residential block. On Deck 14, the walls were bare metal. The cot was narrow, the light flickered when the station's power grid cycled. but behind a false panel under his cot, bolted to the wall with magnetic clamps. That looked like standard maintenance. Fixtures sat a secure terminal. Military encrypted, compact grade. Security clearance, it connected to a single classified channel that routed through 3 relay stations before reaching its destination. Daniel sat down, cracked his knuckles, and typed a coded update. He reported the irregular cargo movements. He reported the timing of deliveries to Bay 14. He reported the chemical signatures he had collected by running his cleaning solvents across the residue left on corridor floors after unmarked crates passed through. The solvents were standard issue. The chemical analysis kit hidden inside his cart was not at the bottom of his report. He added a simple note. The corruption is bigger than initial estimates, requesting extended observation window. Then he sent the report and closed the terminal. The screen flickered once before shutting down, and for a brief moment his designation flashed across it. Human Compliance and Integrity Bureau. Field Inspector Grade 1, assigned. Operative Daniel Harrow, mission. Status active, cover status intact. Daniel slid the panel back into place, lay down on his cot, and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow he would wake up, put on his gray coveralls, push his cart out into the corridor, and let them kick his bucket again. He would mop the same floors. He would bow his head to the same officers. He would absorb the same insults. And he would keep watching, because that was what humans did best when the galaxy decided they were not worth noticing. They watched, they waited, and they remembered every single thing. The chemical waste hit the floor in a long green streak, splashing across freshly clean tiles like someone had gutted a fish across the dinner table. Lieutenant Savar stood at the end of the corridor, holding an empty canister, his mandibles pulled back in what passed for a relava grin. Behind him, 2 junior officers covered their mouths with their upper arms, shaking with laughter. Apologies. Human, Savar said, his tone dripping with amusement. My hand slipped. Daniel looked at the mess. He looked at Savar, then he pulled his mop from the cart, dropped to one knee, and started cleaning. Savar watched for a few seconds, clearly hoping for some reaction, some flicker of anger or humiliation that would make the joke land harder. When none came, he turned and walked away, clicking his mandibles at his friends. Daniel finished cleaning the floor in silence. He wrung the mop head into the bucket, checked the chemical residue left behind, and noted that the waste was industrial solvent from the reactor maintenance bay on deck 4. That bay was not part of Savar's department. Savar had gone out of his way to collect it. He filed the information away, not because it mattered to the investigation, but because it told him something about how deep the contempt ran on the station. When junior officers spent effort humiliating the lowest rank worker for entertainment, it meant the culture above them allowed it, and cultures that allowed cruelty toward those at the bottom were exactly the kind that let corruption grow at the top. That was the real lesson Daniel had learned across 4 undercover postings in 8 years. Corruption never appeared in a vacuum. It lived inside systems that had already decided certain people did not matter. Over the next 2 weeks, Daniel mapped Deck 9 with a precision that the station's own security division could not match. Every room he cleaned became a source of intelligence. In the Logistics office, he memorized the rotation of access codes by watching reflections in the polished surface of a water dispenser mounted behind Drin's desk in the diplomatic lounge. He cataloged which Polaki envoys met with which Relave officers and how their body language shifted when certain topics came up. He discovered that Overseer Drin's operation was larger than a single smuggling route. Drin was running a full pipeline, humanitarian aid crates entered the station through legitimate channels, their contents logged as medical equipment, food, supplements, and water purification gear, meant for struggling colonies on the border. But somewhere between arrival and departure, the contents were swapped. The medicine was sold on the black market. The crates were refilled with stripped-down weapon components, energy cell casings, and targeting array parts, then shipped to a pirate faction operating in neutral space beyond the compact jurisdiction. The profit was enormous. The harm was worse. Verith Minor, the border colony those supplies were meant for, had reported 3 disease outbreaks in 6 months because their medical shipments kept arriving short. People were dying because of Drin's greed, and nobody on the station cared enough to look, because the only people who noticed the discrepancies were humans, and nobody listened to humans. Daniel logged every detail. Weight, differences in cargo manifests, timestamps on Bay 14 deliveries that overlapped with sensor maintenance, schedules, chemical traces from a solvent analysis that confirmed reactor-grade materials were passing through a humanitarian supply corridor. Communication patterns between Drin and an unregistered signal relay hidden the station's communication array, a relay that Daniel had found because the maintenance hatch covering it was the one hatch on Deck 12 that never accumulated dust. Nobody cleaned that hatch except Daniel, and nobody wondered why a janitor might notice which surfaces stayed suspiciously clean. That he sent his second full report through the encrypted terminal. His handler responded with an hour. The evidence was strong, but not yet sufficient for a compact level tribunal. They needed communication intercepts. They needed a direct link between Drin and the pirate buyers. They needed one more piece. Daniel acknowledged the message and closed the channel. He sat in the dark for a long time. That a Polaki diplomat had filed a second complaint that week, demanding that human workers be removed from administrative levels entirely. Director Oshin, the station commander, was reportedly considering it. If humans were banned from Deck 9, Daniel's access would disappear overnight, but he needed more time. But time on the station was a luxury that humans were never given freely. He pulled on his coveralls, loaded his cart, and stepped back into the corridor. The lights buzzed overhead. A Garathi guard glanced at him and looked away immediately, as if eye contact with a janitor might be contagious. Daniel pushed his cart forward and kept his head down. There was still work to do, both kinds. The supply closet on Deck 11 smelled like bleach and recycled air, and the girl standing inside, it looked like she had not slept in 2 days. Her name was Priya Nalan, 23 years old, cargo handler assigned to the lower freight base. She had dark circles under her eyes and grease stains on her jumpsuit that no amount of station soap could fully remove. She blocked Daniel's path the moment he stepped inside to restock his cart. "You are not just a janitor," she said. Daniel looked at her calmly. "I Clean floors for a living. What else would I be? I have watched you for a week, Priya said, her voice low and fast. You memorize door codes. You run your fingers along cargo crates. When you think nobody is looking, you read data pads upside down from across the room. Normal janitors do not do that. Daniel pulled a bottle of cleaning solution from the shelf and placed it on his cart. You have a good imagination, and you have good eyes for a man who is supposed to be mopping floors. He looked at her for a long moment. She was sharp, too sharp for her own safety. He could see in the way she held herself, the tension in her shoulders, the way her gaze kept flicking toward the closet door as if she expected someone to burst in. What do you want? He asked. Priya exhaled hard. I work the graveyard shift in the lower base. 2 weeks ago I saw Hask and 3 of Drin's people moving unmarked crates through Bay 14. No manifest, no logging. They had disabled the local scanner and were loading the crates onto a transport shuttle that was not on any departure schedule. Daniel said nothing. I reported it to my shift supervisor. Priya continued. He told me to forget it. When I pushed, he reassigned me to waste processing and told me if I mentioned it again, he would file a conduct violation and have me shipped back to Earth on the next transport. Her hands are shaking slightly, not from fear alone, from anger. I know something is wrong on the station, she said, and I think you know it too. Daniel set down the bottle he was holding. He did not confirm anything. He did not deny anything, but he looked her in the eye with an intensity that made her step back half a pace. Listen to me carefully, he said. Stay away from Deck 12. Stay away from Bay 14. Do not follow Hask. Do not ask questions about cargo movements. Do your assigned work and keep your head down. Why? Because the people running that operation will not reassign you. If they catch you a second time, they will make you disappear. And nobody on the station will ask where you went, because nobody here cares what happens to humans. The words landed hard. Priya stared at him, searching his face for something. He gave her nothing. She left the closet without another word. Daniel stood alone in the chemical-tinged air and felt the first knot of worry tighten in his chest. Priya was brave and she was angry, and that was the most dangerous combination. On a station where humans had no power and no protection, brave people who felt powerless did desperate things. He returned to his rounds and tried to push the worry aside. 2 days later, it got worse. Overseer Drin had started paying attention. The inventory audits from the human staff sectors had been coming back too clean, too precise, too detailed. Drin was not stupid. He recognized when something did not fit the pattern, and a janitor sector producing better records than the officers' own departments was a pattern break. He assigned Hask to watch Daniel. Daniel noticed within an hour. The scarred enforcer was not subtle. He lingered at corridor junctions, pretended to inspect wall panels, and followed Daniel at a distance that would have been laughable if it were not deadly serious. Daniel changed nothing about his routine. He mopped the same floors. He emptied the same bins. He bowed his head when officers passed and never once looked in Hask's direction. But he adjusted his intelligence drops. He could no longer use the maintenance terminal during normal hours. Instead, he began transmitting during emergency drills, those brief chaotic windows when the station's internal surveillance rerouted to external threat monitoring, and nobody watched the internal feeds. Drills happen once every 9 days. It was not much, but it was enough that he sent a compressed data packet during the next drill. His handler acknowledged receipt and flagged a new concern. Drin had made contact with the pirate faction 3 times in the past week, frequency increasing. Something was accelerating on Drin's end, and Daniel needed to find out what before the window closed. The cat and mouse game had begun, but Drin still did not know what he was hunting. He saw a janitor, an ant on his floor, a nuisance to be watched and perhaps crushed if it crawled too close. He had no idea the ant had already mapped every crack in his house. Drin slammed all 4 fists on his desk, hard enough to crack the surface panel. And every officer in the logistics office flinched. Point 1 of his shipments had vanished. A full cargo load of weapon components worth more than most officers on this station would earn in a decade, intercepted somewhere between Cradle Point and the handoff. Coordinates in neutral space. Gone, no wreck, no distress signal, no trace. Someone had talked, someone on this station had leaked the route. Within 6 hours, Drin locked down Deck 12 entirely, no access without his personal authorization. He pulled his most trusted people into a closed-door meeting and emerged with a list of suspects. Every name on the list was human. Dren brought the list to Director Oshin that same evening. Oshin was a Pollocky, old and cautious, with gray mottled skin and 6 pale eyes that always looked tired. He ran Cradle Point the way most Pollocky ran things, quietly, carefully, and with a deep preference for avoiding conflict. Dren told him humans were a security risk. He pointed to the missing shipment, to irregularities in human staff sectors, to a general pattern of human workers being present in areas where they had no business. He recommended restricting all human crew movements immediately. Oshin agreed in less than 10 minutes. The order went out the next morning. All human personnel on Cradle Point were confined to their assigned work areas and residential blocks. No movement between decks without escort. No access to recreational areas, commissary lounges, or observation platforms. Violators would face immediate detention. The Rovai officers enforced it with visible satisfaction. Garathi guards took extra care to check human ID badges at every checkpoint. The Pollocky diplomatic staff released a memo expressing support for the measure, calling it a reasonable precaution in light of security concerns. Nobody protested, nobody questioned it. Humans were the lowest species on the station, and restricting them felt as natural as locking a storage room. Daniel received the order on his personal terminal while sitting in his quarters. He read it twice, then closed the screen. His access to Deck 9 was now limited to his assigned cleaning shifts. No more lingering, no more late rounds, no more slow walks past Dren's office with his ears open. But confinement had an unexpected benefit. Humans talked more freely when they were locked together in the narrow corridors of Deck 14, in the cramped mess hall where 40 people shared tables meant for 20. Daniel listened. A reactor technician mentioned seeing strange power draws from Deck 12 during off hours. A communications tech whispered that she had noticed encrypted signals going out through an unauthorized relay, but had been told to ignore it by her Rovai supervisor. cargo loader said he had been ordered to reclassify a shipment's weight in the system and told never to mention it. Each fragment alone meant nothing. Together they painted a complete picture. Daniel spent 3 nights compiling his dossier. He had cargo manifests with altered weights, chemical analysis proving reactor-grade weapon materials were passing through humanitarian supply channels, delivery timestamps that aligned perfectly with sensor maintenance windows, communication logs from the unauthorized relay, testimony from 6 human workers who had witnessed irregularities and been silenced, in the crown jewel, a financial trace he had assembled from fragments of data visible on Dren's personal terminal, reflected in the polished water dispenser behind his desk. During cleaning shifts, the money trail led directly from Dren to a pirate faction called the Broken Circuit, operating out of a dead system 3 jumps beyond the compact's border. It was enough, more than enough, that he was preparing his final transmission when the emergency alert hit his terminal. Priya and Owen detained, Deck 12. Charges: sabotage and unauthorized access to restricted military areas. Daniel closed his eyes. She had gone back, despite his warning, despite everything. She had gone back to Bay 14. She had tried to gather evidence on her own because she did not trust anyone else to do it, and Hask had caught her. The detention report was brief. Priya had been found inside the bay after curfew. She had resisted when confronted. Hask had subdued her. The report listed her injuries as minor, but Daniel knew Hask. Minor to a Rilvi enforcer meant broken ribs and concussion to a human. She was sitting in a holding cell on Deck 7, alone, injured, and facing a station tribunal that would process her case. Within days, the outcome was already decided: sabotage charges on an allied station carried a minimum sentence of 5 years in a penal labor colony for a human with no advocate and no allies. The sentence would likely be worse. Daniel sat in the dark of his quarters and stared at the wall. His mission protocol was absolute: do not break cover, do not intervene in local matters, document and report. Let the compact's tribunal system deliver justice through proper channels. Proper channels had never delivered justice for humans on the station. Proper channels were the reason Dren had operated freely for years. Proper channels had looked the other way every single time a human was humiliated, silenced, beaten, or dismissed. Daniel opened his encrypted terminal and began typing. His handler's voice came through the encrypted channel, flat and controlled the way intelligence officers always sounded when they were about to say no. Harrow, the case is strong, but it is not sealed. If we move now, Dren's legal team could challenge the chain of evidence. He could walk on a procedural technicality. Daniel leaned forward in the dim light of his closet-sized room, his face lit only by the glow of the terminal screen. A human girl is sitting in a cell on Deck 7 with broken ribs and a concussion. He said she will be sentenced within 72 hours on fabricated charges. If they send her to a penal colony, she will not survive a year. I understand the situation, but protocol exists for a reason. If you break cover now and the case collapses, Dren continues operating and more people die. On Varith Minor, Daniel was quiet for a long time. He could hear the hum of the station's power grid through the walls, that low, constant vibration that never stopped. like the heartbeat of a machine that did not care who lived inside it. I'm transmitting my full dossier now, he said. Every piece of evidence I have collected over the past 4 months, cargo, manifest chemical analyses, communication intercepts, financial traces, and testimony references from 6 human crew members. You will also find a detailed log of the station command's negligence, including Director Oshin's failure to investigate multiple reported irregularities. Harrow, listen me carefully. If we accelerate the timeline, the tribunal may consider the evidence premature. We could lose months of work, then build the rest of the case from what I'm giving you. I collected enough to bury Dren 10 times over, but I will not sit in this room and let them destroy a 23-year-old girl who had more courage than every officer on the station combined. His handler went silent for several seconds. Daniel could almost hear the calculations happening on the other end, the weighing of protocol against consequence, the bureaucratic math that intelligence agencies ran every time a field operative went off script. Transmit the dossier, the handler said finally. Daniel sent everything, 4 months of observation, compressed into a data packet that would travel through 3 encrypted relay stations before reaching the compact oversight authority on the central world. It was the largest single intelligence submission the Human Compliance Bureau had filed in 2 years. Then he triggered something else. Priority Distress Code designation. Crimson 9, reserved exclusively for situations where an Allied compact installation was compromised from within. It had been used only twice in the compact's history. Both times had resulted in immediate military and judicial response. The code went out. There was no taking it back. 0.14 hours later, a ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of Cradle Point sensor range. The station's traffic control officer, a young Relava who had never seen a human warship before, stared at his screen and forgot to breathe. The HSS Steadfast was not large by galactic standards. It was a frigate, compact and angular, built with the kind of aggressive efficiency that humans put into machines they expected to use in a fight. It carried no diplomatic colors. Its hull was dark gray with a single white stripe along the bow, and it moved with the quiet confidence of a predator that did not need to announce itself. It requested docking clearance and transmitted a judicial authorization code from the compact oversight authority. Director Oken nearly fell out of his chair. Within an hour, a delegation boarded Cradle Point. 3 judicial officers from the compact's oversight tribunal, 2 Relava and 1 Shin, accompanied by a squad of 8 human enforcement agents in black tactical armor. The lead officer was a human woman named Commander Adira Sal, tall, calm, and carrying a sealed legal warrant with Dren's name on it. Dren was in his office when the news reached him. Hask burst through the door and told him armed humans were on the station with judicial authority. Dren's mandibles went rigid. His compound eyes darted to the door, then to his terminal, then to the secure cabinet where he kept his private communications device. Then he reached for the cabinet. The door to his office opened before he got there. Commander Sal stepped inside, flanked by 2 enforcement agents. She held up the warrant. Overseer Dren, by authority of the compact oversight tribunal, you are hereby ordered to Present yourself for emergency judicial proceedings. All personal devices and records on this deck are now under tribunal seal. Resistance will be met with appropriate force. Dren looked at the human woman standing in his office, armed, authorized, and completely unbothered by his rank, his species, or his four clenched fists. For the first time in years, he had nothing to say. On deck 7, in a holding cell, with dim lights and cold metal walls, Preya Nolan heard boots in the corridor. Outside her door, heavy boots moving with purpose. She pressed herself against the back wall and waited, expecting expecting another interrogation, expecting pain. The door opened. A human enforcement officer stood in the frame, visor up, hand extended. Preya Nolan, you're being transferred to protective custody under compact judicial authority. Can you walk? Preya stared at the extended hand, as if it belonged to a ghost. Then she took it. The main concourse of Cradle Point had never been this quiet. Every seat in the public gallery was filled. Relava officers sat in rigid rows, their compound eyes fixed forward. Polaki diplomats huddled in clusters, whispering behind cupped hands. Garathi security personnel lined the walls with their arms crossed. Shin observers sat perfectly still, their silver skin reflecting the overhead lights like polished mirrors. And in the front row, separated from the rest by a thin metal railing, sat every human on the station. 41 men and women in worn jumpsuits and maintenance coveralls, sitting upright, silent and watching. The tribunal bench held 3 judges. Chief Judge Aravith, a Relava elder, with faded amber plating and slow, deliberate movements, a Shin legal scholar named Ritkeeper Dahl, and a Polaki jurist named Adjudicator Fen, who had been brought in specifically because she had no prior connection to Cradle Point. Overseer Dren sat at the defendant's table, flanked by 2 Relava legal advocates. His posture was rigid. His mandibles clicked softly, the only sign of agitation he allowed himself to show. Hask sat behind him, motionless, his scarred face unreadable. Commander Sal stood at the prosecution table and addressed the tribunal with a brief opening statement. The compact oversight authority had received evidence of systematic corruption aboard Cradle Point, including diversion of humanitarian supplies, illegal arms, trafficking, and obstruction of internal reporting by station personnel. The key witness would present the evidence in person. She turned toward the side entrance. The door opened and Daniel Harrow walked in. He was not wearing gray coveralls. He was not pushing a cleaning cart. He wore the black and silver uniform of the Human Compliance and Integrity Bureau, pressed and clean with his field. His boots clicked on the polished floor in a rhythm that echoed through the silent concourse. The reaction rippled through the gallery like a shockwave that made no sound. Lieutenant Savar, who had poured chemical waste on Daniel's freshly cleaned floor, leaned back in his seat as if he had been physically struck. Envoy Rissick, who had filed complaints demanding humans be removed from administrative levels, went pale. The Garathi guard who had shoved Daniel into a wall gripped his own armrest hard enough to bend the metal. Dren stared at the man he had kicked. Mop buckets passed for 4 months and his mandibles stopped clicking. Daniel took the witness stand. He spoke for 47 minutes, no notes, no haset. Astian, he laid out the evidence. Precise systematic order, cargo. Manifest showing weight discrepancies between logged humanitarian supplies and actual crate contents, chemical analysis, proving reactor-grade weapon materials had been transported through cradle. Points humanitarian corridor. Timestamps demonstrating that deliveries to Bay 14 were deliberately scheduled during sensor maintenance windows to avoid detection. He presented communication intercepts from the unauthorized relay on Deck 12, linking Dren directly to the broken circuit pirate faction. He presented financial traces showing payments routed through 3 shell accounts to Dren's personal holdings. He presented testimony logs from 6 human crew members who had reported irregularities and been silenced by their supervisors. Every piece of evidence was cross-referenced, time-stamped, and independently verifiable. When he finished, Dren's lead advocate stood and attempted challenge. This witness is a sanitation worker, a janitor. His testimony cannot be given the weight of a trained investigator. Chief Judge Aravith looked at the advocate, then at Daniel, then back at the advocate. This witness is a grade 1 field inspector of the Human Compliance Bureau, operating under Compact Sanction Authority. His cover as a sanitation worker was precisely the reason his investigation succeeded. No one watched him because no one on this station considered a human janitor worth watching. The judge paused. That failure belongs to this station's leadership, not to the witness. The tribunal deliberated for less than 2 hours. Overseer Dren was convicted on all charges: arms trafficking, diversion of humanitarian supplies, conspiracy to defraud the compact, obstruction of justice. He was sentenced to 30 years in a maximum security compact detention facility with no possibility of early release. Hask was convicted as an accomplice and received 15 years. Director Akin was removed from command for gross negligence and permanently barred from holding administrative office within the compact. Preya Nalin was formally exonerated of all charges. The tribunal issued a written commendation recognizing her courage in attempting to expose the corruption and ordered the station to compensate her for injuries sustained during unlawful detention. After the proceedings, Commander Saul found Daniel in the corridor outside the concourse. She handed him a data pad containing a formal offer, promotion to Bureau Senior Inspector with a diplomatic advisory posting at Compact Central Command. Daniel read it. He handed it back. I appreciate it, he said, but I'm more useful where nobody can see me. Saul studied him for a moment, then nodded. Where do you want to go next? Wherever the next station is that thinks humans are not worth noticing. 3 weeks later, a new janitor arrived at Farpent Relay, a mid-tier communications hub operated by Garathi Shin Joint Command in the inner territories. He was a quiet human in his late 40s, stocky, unremarkable, with a gray cart full of cleaning supplies and a name tag that read Daniel Harrow, maintenance, sanitation crew grade lowest. He pushed his cart through the main corridor on his first morning shift. A Garathi officer glanced at him, snorted, and looked away. Daniel kept his head down and started mopping. He was already watching